One careless second can destroy a career, but sometimes it can change a life forever. Emily Carter had no idea that the next 30 seconds would become the most important moment of her life. The elevator doors slid open on the 42nd floor of Brooks Holdings. She stepped out quickly, balancing a tray with 2 cups of coffee while trying to ignore the knot in her stomach. Her morning had already fallen apart. Her 6-year-old son, Noah, had woken up with a fever. The babysitter arrived late. Traffic across downtown Chicago was a nightmare. By the time Emily reached the office, she was 23 minutes behind schedule. For a temporary administrative assistant living paycheck to paycheck, being late was never a small mistake. She moved faster down the hallway, hearing the distant sounds of executives gathering inside the boardroom. The quarterly strategy meeting was about to begin. Every senior leader in the company would be there. Most importantly, Ethan Brooks would be there. The Billionaire CEO rarely tolerated mistakes. At least, that's what everyone said. Emily had never spoken more than 3 words to him. People described him as brilliant, demanding, impossible to impress. She tightened her grip on the tray. Just deliver the coffee. Just survive the morning. That was the plan. Then everything went wrong. As she reached the boardroom entrance, someone pushed through the door from the opposite side. Emily stepped back instinctively. Her heel caught the edge of a floor mat. Time seemed to slow. The tray tilted. 1 cup slid. Then the other. Hot coffee splashed through the air in a dark wave. Gasps echoed across the room. Emily froze. The expensive black suit standing directly in front of her was now covered in coffee. Silence. Complete silence. 20 executives stared at her as if the world had stopped turning. Emily's heart dropped into her stomach. Standing only a few feet away was Ethan Brooks himself. A stain spread across his white dress shirt beneath the jacket. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Emily felt every pair of eyes lock onto her face. Her hands trembled. Heat rushed into her cheeks. This was it. The end. She had lost jobs for much less. Her mind raced through unpaid bills, rent due next week, Noah's medical appointment. One accident. One stupid accident. Mr. Brooks, I'm so sorry, she whispered. The words barely came out. Ethan looked down at the coffee on his suit. Then he slowly lifted his eyes toward her. Emily braced herself. She expected anger, disappointment, maybe even security. Instead, Ethan asked a question nobody in the room expected. Are you hurt? Emily blinked. For a second, she wondered if she had heard him correctly. Around the table, executives exchanged confused looks. Ethan's expression remained calm, almost concerned. The silence grew heavier. Emily opened her mouth, but no words came out. Because in that moment, she realized something even stranger than the accident itself. Ethan Brooks was looking at her like he already knew exactly who she was. Emily finally found her voice. No, sir. I am okay. The words sounded small inside the massive boardroom. Ethan Brooks gave a slight nod, then handed her a folded handkerchief from his pocket. The gesture was so unexpected that she simply stared at it. Around the table, executives looked even more confused. One senior vice president cleared his throat awkwardly. Another checked his notes, pretending not to watch. Ethan turned toward his assistant. Please have facilities help with the cleanup. His tone remained calm, steady, completely unaffected. Then he walked into the meeting as if nothing unusual had happened. Emily stood frozen for another second before gathering the empty cups with shaking hands. Her face burned with embarrassment. Every instinct told her she had just destroyed her future at Brooks Holdings. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. She expected an email from Human Resources. She expected a call from her supervisor. She expected someone to tell her to clear out her desk. Instead, nothing happened. Noon came. Then 2 o'clock. Then 4. Nobody said a word. That silence felt worse than any reprimand. During her break, Emily sat alone in the small employee lounge, staring at a vending machine without really seeing it. Her thoughts kept replaying the same moment. Not the spill itself. Not the embarrassment. Ethan's reaction. Why had he asked if she was hurt? Why had he looked genuinely concerned? She had worked enough jobs to know that executives rarely noticed temporary employees. Most did not know their names. Yet something about that moment felt different. You are the coffee girl now. The voice pulled her from her thoughts. 2 employees entered the lounge laughing quietly. They stopped when they noticed her sitting there. One offered an uncomfortable smile. The other looked away. Emily forced a polite nod, But the comment stung more than she wanted to admit. By the end of the day, everyone seemed to know what had happened. Some felt sorry for her. Others appeared entertained. The rumors had already begun. When she finally left the office, the Chicago skyline glowed beneath the orange light of sunset. She drove straight to pick up Noah. The moment her 6-year-old son saw her, he wrapped his arms around her waist. Some of the tension immediately melted away. "Did you have a good day, Mom?" he asked. Emily smiled despite everything. It was definitely memorable. That night, after Noah fell asleep, she sat at the kitchen table reviewing bills. Rent, utilities, medical expenses. Her temporary contract would expire in less than 2 months. Losing this job was not an option. She closed her eyes and whispered a quiet prayer for another chance. Across the city, high above downtown, Ethan Brooks sat alone in his office. A file rested on his desk. The label on the front read Emily Carter. Inside were performance evaluations, project notes, and observations dating back several months. Ethan opened the file once more. A faint smile appeared on his face. The coffee accident was not what had captured his attention. In truth, he had been watching her long before that morning. What he planned to do next would shock everyone in the company. Some opportunities arrived disguised as ordinary mornings. Emily Carter learned that lesson the next day. She arrived at Brooks Holdings 30 minutes early, determined to avoid even the smallest mistake. The memory of the boardroom incident still lingered in every hallway she walked through. A few employees smiled sympathetically. Others whispered when they thought she could not hear them. She kept her head down and focused on work. Shortly after 9 o'clock, her desk phone rang. "Emily Carter," a professional voice asked. "Yes. Mr. Brooks would like to see you in his office at 10 o'clock. Her stomach immediately tightened. The call lasted less than 10 seconds, yet it felt like the longest conversation of her life. For the next hour, she could barely focus on her computer screen. Every possible outcome raced through her mind. Maybe human resources wanted a witness present while she was terminated. Maybe the company had decided the incident reflected poorly on the executive floor. Maybe this was simply a formal warning. By the time 10 o'clock arrived, her hands felt cold. She stepped into the executive elevator and watched the numbers climb. 40, 41, 42. Each floor seemed to bring her closer to bad news. When the doors opened, she was greeted by a stunning view of downtown Chicago stretching for miles beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. Ethan Brooks's office sat at the end of a quiet hallway. His assistant offered a polite smile. "You can go in now." Emily took a slow breath before entering. The office was larger than her entire apartment. Natural light filled the room. Bookshelves lined one wall. Awards and framed photographs occupied another. Ethan stood near the windows, reviewing a document. He looked up as she entered. "Good morning, Emily." The fact that he knew her name without looking at a file surprised her. "Good morning, sir." He motioned toward a chair. "Please sit." Emily obeyed, trying to remain calm. Ethan studied her for a moment. Not in an uncomfortable way. More like someone evaluating a puzzle. "How is your son feeling?" Emily froze. Her eyes widened. "My son?" Ethan nodded. "Noah. I heard he was sick earlier this week." For several seconds, she could not answer. Very few people in the company even knew she had a child. Temporary employees rarely discussed their personal lives. "He is feeling better. Thank you for asking." Ethan smiled slightly. "That is good to hear." The conversation felt stranger with every passing minute. This was not how terminations happened. This was not how billionaire chief executive officers spent their mornings. Ethan walked back to his desk and opened a folder. Emily immediately recognized her name on the cover. Her pulse quickened. The folder looked thick, far thicker than she expected. Ethan glanced through several pages. "Do you know why I asked you here?" Emily swallowed. "I assumed it was about the accident." A brief look of amusement crossed his face. "No, the accident is not why you are here." He turned the folder toward her. Inside were project reports, notes, and performance evaluations dating back months. Emily stared in disbelief. Then Ethan said something that changed everything. "You have no idea how closely I have been watching your work." Emily stared at the folder as if it belonged to someone else. Her name was printed clearly across the front, yet nothing inside matched the way she saw herself. She had always considered herself invisible. Temporary employees were not supposed to attract attention from people like Ethan Brooks. They were supposed to do their work, collect a paycheck, then quietly move on. Ethan opened the folder and slid several pages across the desk. 3 months ago, the marketing division nearly sent an inaccurate budget report to a major client, he said. You found the error at 11:30 at night. Emily remembered that evening immediately. She had stayed late organizing files. The mistake had caught her attention by accident. I was just helping, she said softly. Ethan nodded. Most people would have ignored it. He turned another page. 2 months ago, a vendor contract contained a billing discrepancy worth nearly $50,000. You noticed it? Emily blinked. That was part of my assignment. No, Ethan replied calmly. Your assignment was filing paperwork. Identifying the discrepancy was not. Emily did not know what to say. Ethan continued. One example became another, then another. Small moments she had forgotten. Problems she had solved. Mistakes she had quietly corrected without expecting recognition. Throughout the conversation, a pattern slowly emerged. Ethan had not been tracking her failures. He had been tracking her potential. Why? She finally asked. Why were you paying attention to me? Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair. For the first time, his expression softened. Because talent leaves clues. The room fell silent. Many people work hard when someone is watching, he continued. Very few work hard when nobody notices. You do. Emily lowered her eyes. Nobody had ever described her that way before. Most of her life had been spent proving herself. Working extra shifts. Taking classes at night. Raising Noah while trying to build a future. Recognition was not something she expected. Survival had always been the goal. Ethan closed the folder. Tell me something, Emily. If you were not worried about failing, what would you want your career to become? The question caught her completely off guard. She hesitated. Then she answered honestly. I would want to lead projects someday. Maybe operations. Maybe management. Her voice grew quieter. But that is probably unrealistic. Ethan immediately shook his head. No, it is realistic. You simply have not been given the opportunity. Emily felt a mixture of hope and disbelief. For years she had heard reasons why she was not qualified enough, experienced enough, connected enough. Nobody had ever spoken as if her future could actually be bigger. A gentle knock interrupted the conversation. Ethan's assistant stepped into the office. The executive team is ready for the leadership meeting. Ethan glanced at the clock. Thank you. He stood and gathered the folder. Emily rose from her chair, assuming the meeting was over. Am I still employed? She asked nervously. A smile touched the corner of Ethan's mouth. Emily, I did not bring you here to discuss termination. He picked up the folder and walked toward the door. I brought you here because in 30 minutes I am going to make an announcement that will surprise this entire company. Emily followed Ethan out of the office in a daze. Her mind struggled to keep pace with everything that had happened during the past hour. An announcement that would surprise the entire company. The words echoed in her head as they walked toward the executive conference center. Employees stepped aside respectfully as Ethan passed. Several glanced curiously at Emily walking only a few feet behind him. She felt completely out of place among senior leaders and department heads. The conference room was already full when they entered. More than 50 managers sat around a massive table while others stood along the walls. Conversations filled the room until Ethan stepped to the front. Then silence settled almost instantly. Emily remained near the back, hoping nobody would notice her. Unfortunately, several people already had. She spotted raised eyebrows, confused expressions, quiet whispers. Ethan waited until every eye was focused on him. Thank you all for being here, he began. His voice was calm but commanding. Before we discuss quarterly goals, I would like to address leadership development inside this company. Emily's pulse quickened. Ethan continued. Brooks Holdings has always claimed to reward talent, initiative, and integrity. Today I want to prove that those values are more than words. Several executives exchanged puzzled looks. Ethan reached for a folder resting on the table. Emily immediately recognized it. It was hers. Over the past several months, I have personally reviewed the performance of an employee who consistently exceeded expectations without seeking recognition. The room grew quieter. She identified costly reporting errors, protected client relationships, improved internal processes, and demonstrated exceptional judgment under pressure. People began looking around the room, trying to identify who he was describing. Ethan paused. Then he looked directly at Emily. Emily Carter, would you please come forward? A wave of shock moved through the room. Emily felt her legs weaken. For a moment, she considered refusing. Every pair of eyes seemed fixed on her. Somehow she managed to walk toward the front. The silence became almost overwhelming. Ethan smiled slightly. Effective immediately, Emily Carter will serve as Senior Executive Assistant to the Chief Executive Officer. The room froze. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Emily thought she had misunderstood. Senior Executive Assistant to the Chief Executive Officer. The position was several levels above her temporary administrative role. It came with authority, responsibility, and opportunities she had never imagined possible. Then the room erupted into applause. Some people clapped enthusiastically. Others did so more cautiously. A few looked stunned. Emily could barely hear any of it. Her heart was pounding too loudly. Ethan handed her an official document. "Congratulations, Emily." She stared at the promotion letter. Her eyes filled with tears she fought desperately to control. "Thank you," she whispered. Across the room, not everyone appeared pleased. One executive near the far end of the table sat with folded arms and a hard expression. His name was Richard Lawson, Senior Director of Operations. Richard had spent years climbing the corporate ladder. He believed promotions should follow hierarchy in politics. Watching a temporary employee receive this opportunity felt almost insulting to him. As applause faded, Richard's eyes remained locked on Emily. In that moment, he made a silent decision. If Emily Carter thought this promotion was the beginning of her success, she was about to discover how difficult life inside Brooks Holdings could become. Success can feel lonely when nobody believes you deserve it. 3 days after her promotion, Emily began to understand that reality. Her new office sat only a short walk from Ethan Brooks's executive suite. The space was larger than any workspace she had ever had, complete with a window overlooking the Chicago skyline. Yet every morning, the excitement she felt was met by something colder. Suspicion. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms. Smiles disappeared when she approached. Some employees remained kind. Others seemed determined to remind her that she did not belong. Emily focused on her work. She arrived early. She stayed late. She reviewed schedules, prepared reports, coordinated meetings, and learned responsibilities that would normally take months to master. Every evening, she returned home exhausted but proud. No one noticed the difference immediately. "You smile more now," he told her one night while finishing homework at the kitchen table. Emily laughed softly. Maybe because things are finally getting better. She wanted to believe that. Unfortunately, not everyone inside Brooks Holdings shared that goal. Richard Lawson watched everything. From his position as Senior Director of Operations, he had influence throughout the company. He never openly challenged Ethan's decision. Instead, he chose a different strategy. He began planting doubt. During meetings, he questioned Emily's recommendations. In private conversations, he suggested that her promotion had happened too quickly. Rumors spread quietly through departments. Some employees claimed Ethan was showing favoritism. Others insisted there had to be information nobody knew. Emily heard fragments of the gossip almost daily. Each comment felt like a small weight added to her shoulders. One afternoon, she entered a conference room moments before a planning session. 2 managers were already inside. Neither noticed her standing near the door. "There is no way she earned that position," one said. "People work 10 years for opportunities like that." The other nodded. "Give it a few weeks. She will make a mistake." Emily quietly stepped back into the hallway before they saw her. The words stayed with her all day. That evening, Ethan noticed something was wrong. She was organizing meeting materials in his office when he looked up from a document. "You seem distracted." Emily forced a smile. "I am fine." Ethan studied her for a moment. That answer usually means the opposite. She hesitated. Then she told him the truth. Not every detail. Just enough. The whispers. The doubts. The feeling that she was constantly being judged. Ethan listened without interrupting. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair. "People are comfortable with familiar stories," he said. "When someone changes the expected outcome, it makes them uncomfortable." Emily looked down. What if they are right? Ethan's response came immediately. They are not. His confidence surprised her. The question is not whether you belong here. The question is whether you are willing to keep proving it. Before Emily could answer, her computer alerted with a new company-wide notification. A major client account worth millions of dollars had encountered a serious operational problem. Emergency meetings were being scheduled across multiple departments. Employees began rushing through the executive floor. Ethan stood and grabbed a file. His expression turned serious. This situation could affect the entire company. Then he looked directly at Emily. Pay attention. What happens next may become the biggest test of your career. The next morning began before sunrise. By 7 o'clock, every major department at Brooks Holdings was already involved in the client crisis. A logistics error had disrupted deliveries for one of the company's largest partners. Deadlines were slipping. Frustration was growing. Millions of dollars were potentially at risk. Conference rooms filled quickly. Phones rang nonstop. Tension hung over the executive floor like a storm cloud. Emily spent the first few hours coordinating schedules, distributing reports, and tracking updates from multiple teams. The amount of information moving through the building was overwhelming. Yet something felt wrong. As she reviewed a stack of documents for an emergency meeting, a detail caught her attention. Then another. Her eyes narrowed. The problem everyone was discussing did not seem to match the data in front of her. She pulled additional reports from the system. For nearly an hour, she compared numbers, timelines, and vendor communications. The deeper she looked, the more convinced she became. The company was focusing on the wrong problem. Shortly before noon, Ethan entered the executive conference room for another strategy session. Department heads immediately began presenting solutions. Most involved expensive emergency measures that would take weeks to implement. Emily sat quietly near the end of the table, reviewing her notes. Richard Lawson was leading much of the discussion. His plan required significant resources and carried substantial risk. Several executives appeared uncertain, but nobody challenged him directly. Finally, Ethan looked around the room. Are there any alternatives we have not considered? Silence followed. Emily felt her heart race. Speaking up in a room filled with senior leaders was intimidating enough. Contradicting them seemed impossible. Yet the numbers in her hands refused to leave her mind. Slowly, she raised her hand. A few executives looked surprised. Richard looked irritated. Ethan nodded. Go ahead, Emily. She took a careful breath. I do not think the delivery system is the root cause. Several eyebrows lifted immediately. Emily continued. She explained the inconsistencies she had found. She pointed to communication records. She highlighted timing discrepancies. Then she revealed the conclusion that had emerged from her review. The actual problem originated with a vendor reporting error that had triggered a chain reaction across multiple departments. If corrected immediately, the disruption could be resolved within days instead of weeks. The room became completely silent. Richard frowned. That is a very ambitious conclusion based on limited information. Emily expected resistance. Instead of backing down, she calmly walked everyone through the evidence. One by one, executives began reviewing the documents she referenced. Expressions changed. Questions followed. Additional data was verified. 20 minutes later, an operations analyst spoke up. She is right. Another manager checked the numbers independently. Same result. Then another. Ethan remained quiet throughout the process, watching carefully. Finally, he closed the report in front of him. Implement Emily's recommendation immediately. The room shifted instantly. What had started as a suggestion became the company's official strategy. Richard said nothing. His jaw tightened. Emily hardly believed what was happening. By late afternoon, early results confirmed her analysis. The solution was working. The crisis was already beginning to stabilize. For the first time since her promotion, people looked at her differently. Not with suspicion, not with doubt, with respect. Yet as employees celebrated the progress, Ethan received a confidential update that changed his expression completely. Someone inside the company had known about the reporting error days earlier and never reported it. The following morning, the atmosphere inside Brooks Holdings felt completely different. Employees who had doubted. Emily now greeted her with genuine respect. Several managers stopped by her office to thank her for helping resolve the crisis. Even so, something continued to bother her. She could not forget the expression on Ethan's face after receiving that confidential update. He had remained calm, but she had worked closely enough with him to recognize when something serious was happening behind the scenes. By late afternoon, Ethan asked her to join him in a private conference room. A thick folder rested on the table between them. Emily immediately sensed this conversation would be important. Ethan closed the door and sat down. There is something you should know, he said. His voice was steady, yet more personal than usual. Emily listened carefully. Ethan opened the folder and revealed a series of internal reports. The documents showed that several warnings about the vendor reporting issue had been submitted days before the crisis reached senior leadership. Someone had seen the problem developing. Someone had chosen not to escalate it. Emily looked through the pages, trying to understand. Then she noticed a familiar name. Richard Lawson. Her eyes widened. Ethan nodded slowly. Richard received multiple alerts. He never acted on them. Emily struggled to process what she was seeing. Why would he ignore something that important? Ethan folded his hands. Because he believed his team could solve it quietly. Instead, the problem grew. He paused. The situation became much worse than it ever needed to be. Emily sat silently for a moment. Then another realization surfaced. You already knew Richard disagreed with my promotion. Ethan gave a faint smile. I knew he disagreed. I did not know he would allow pride to affect his judgment. The room became quiet. Sunlight reflected against the windows as downtown Chicago prepared for evening. Finally, Emily asked the question she had carried for weeks. Why did you choose me? Ethan leaned back and looked toward the city skyline. Most people think leadership is about confidence, he said. I disagree. His gaze returned to hers. Leadership is about responsibility. It is about doing the right thing when nobody is watching. Emily remembered the examples he had shown her. The late nights. The reports. The small problems she had solved without expecting recognition. Ethan continued. Long before your promotion, I watched how you treated people. I watched how you approached problems. You never looked for credit. You looked for solutions. Emily felt emotion rising in her chest. For years she had worked quietly, believing nobody noticed. Yet somehow someone had. The coffee incident did not change my opinion of you, Ethan said. It simply revealed your character under pressure. Emily laughed softly through the emotion. So, I was never being evaluated because of that accident. Ethan shook his head. No, your future was already being considered. The answer left her speechless. Everything suddenly made sense. The promotion, the trust, the opportunities. None of it had been luck. Ethan stood and gathered the documents. You earned every bit of this. As they prepared to leave the conference room, another message arrived from the executive board. After reviewing the investigation, leadership had decided to take immediate action regarding Richard Lawson's future with the company. Emily stared at the notification, realizing that by the next morning, Brooks Holdings would never be the same again. The next morning, employees arrived at Brooks Holdings expecting another ordinary workday. Instead, they found a company that felt transformed. News spread quickly that Richard Lawson was no longer leading operations. The board had concluded that critical warnings should have been reported immediately. Accountability had finally caught up with assumptions and pride. For Emily, the moment felt unreal. Only a few weeks earlier, she had been a temporary employee worried about paying bills. Now she sat in executive meetings where her ideas mattered. More importantly, she no longer felt invisible. As she walked through the office, people greeted her differently. Not because of her title. Not because Ethan Brooks trusted her. They respected her because she had earned it. The crisis had proven what Ethan had seen all along. Later that afternoon, Emily received an unexpected invitation. Ethan asked her to join him for a visit to a community education program supported by the company. When they arrived, dozens of children were participating in after-school activities. Emily watched Ethan interact with families, teachers, and volunteers. Away from the corporate world, he seemed different, more relaxed, more human. During the drive back to the city, neither spoke for several minutes. The skyline shimmered ahead as evening settled across Chicago. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. Do you know why I support programs like that? Emily shook her head. Ethan smiled faintly. Because someone once gave me an opportunity when I had not earned anyone's confidence yet. One chance changed everything. Emily looked out the window, thinking about her own journey. A single opportunity had changed her life too. When she arrived home that evening, Noah ran to the door with a huge grin. Mom, guess what? I got an A on my science project. Emily laughed and pulled him into a hug. I knew you could do it. Noah looked up at her proudly. You always tell me to keep trying. The words hit her harder than he realized. For so long she had been teaching him lessons, she struggled to believe herself. Keep trying. Keep working. Keep believing. Now those lessons finally felt true. Weeks turned into months. Emily continued growing into her role. New challenges appeared, but so did new successes. She led projects, built confidence, and discovered abilities she never knew she possessed. Through it all, Ethan remained a mentor who challenged her to think bigger than fear. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the Chicago skyline, Emily stood in her office looking out across the city. The journey still felt impossible to explain. One accident had brought her face to face with a moment she thought would destroy everything. Instead, it revealed a future she never imagined. Ethan paused at her doorway before leaving for the night. "You know," he said, "most people believe success changes a person." Emily smiled. "Does it not?" Ethan shook his head. "No. It reveals who they were becoming all along." After he left, Emily stood quietly for a moment. Then she looked at the city lights below and smiled. For the first time in a very long time, she was not worried about what tomorrow might take away. She was excited about what tomorrow might